Hello and welcome back to the channel. Today's review is going to be on the long-awaited 6th studio album by American indie rock band The Strokes. After a 7-year wait in between albums, this one is finally being delivered to us, and I can't say that I have been waiting for this album, but they have kept their loyal fan base waiting for 7 years at this point, making this one of the most highly anticipated albums of the year. As you all may or may not know, I actually reacted to The Strokes for the very first time about 2 days ago. And the only album I've heard in full by them is This It? So that's all I really have to make my comparisons upon. I've heard many people, most people really, cite it as their best work, so I feel like I have somewhat of a grasp of what I'm looking at here. I just wanted to throw that out there to give myself full disclosure. I may not know exactly what I'm talking about with the band's lore at every moment. While Is This It was a very tight, concise set of 11 songs, they all felt very well tied together. And in my first listen, first experience, I felt like these songs were even maybe telling a concrete story from start to finish, and in a lot of ways I think that's true. Certain things have been brought to my attention that make certain songs stand out from the others, and certain songs do tackle very different subject matter and topics, although I would imagine in a lot of ways it still can be looked at in a very cohesive light. However, comparing this album to Is This It is really an impossible thing to do in that way. This album is 9 songs long at 45 minutes, and each song on here feels like an entirely different world than the one before it most of the time. That's not to say that nothing is ever tying these tracks together, it's just that almost all of the time each one of these songs could be on a totally separate, different project from each other, and you probably wouldn't think to tie them together most of the time. So really, I don't think it's fair to look at this album how I usually look at albums and rate the entire thing together and talk about it as only as a whole piece. I think it's much more fair to break this down song by song, piece by piece, and talk about each piece before I talk about it as a entire narrative. Track number 1, The Adults Are Talking, is maybe one of the most out of place in the track listing. This track features some very simple, calming, and mellow instrumentation and singing. The singing is mixed a little bit strangely on this song, but it still gives you a very mellow, calm, almost ASMR type vibe. That's not to say there's nothing to like about this instrumental at all. There definitely is a lot of charm in it, in that it has a very emotionally strong appeal to it. This melody just kind of makes you want to cry inexplicably. And in this first song, we see one thing that's very consistent all the way through. The band works really well together on this instrumental as a well-oiled machine in a lot of ways to create a very vibrant, immersive atmosphere that really sucks you in with this song. The lyricism on this track seems to be the biggest reason that it's kind of stand out and kind of different from the rest of the track listing. This song, most of the way through, appears to be talking about kind of the dynamic of the regular person versus the rich and powerful people who are in control. There's multiple ways to interpret all of these songs, and I'm not going to say that every single time, but at least that's what I was getting from it. I mean, stockholders are name-dropped specifically. It seems like that's the dynamic that we're getting at, is the average person kind of rising up against the rich, powerful people who are in control. Track number 2, Selfless, is a very strong song that your ears will eat like candy. The atmosphere building on this song is super well done, even more well done than the track before it, I say, in a lot of ways. This track is the first song where a constant recurring idea pops up that I really like the direction of, and that's that there will often be 2 different guitar melodies going one in each side of the mix. So you're effectively hearing two completely different guitar melodies in each ear at a time. And this fills the space of the song so well. Julian flexing his vocal range, filling this track full of falsettos, is a interesting touch as well that's once again very nice on the ears. This is one of the simpler songs lyrically in that it's mostly just a regular love song. However, calling it Selfless seems to be poetically intentional because the narrator of the song is talking about basically not being able to live without the person they're singing about, so it's almost like it's selfishly selfless. Track number 3 is Brooklyn Bridge to Chorus, the very meta song that it is. This is one of two tracks that makes really good use of synths, and instantly as the song comes on, that is incredibly attention-grabbing. Much of this song will send chills through your body. This song is very sonically transcendental and will make you feel like you are flying and then crashing back down to the earth. From the catching and ear-grabbing synths that I already mentioned, all the way to this ascending chorus, to the closing of this song with its chilling melodies. This is just one of the most entertaining songs sonically on this whole record. The lyrics deal much in the way of nostalgia and reminiscing on the fact that he has grown older and through this time has lost a lot of friends, still wants more out of life though, still maybe wants to find new people to spend his time with. Number 4, Bad Decisions, is another very interesting song on the album. This track features much more simple instrumentation than the previous and something much more along the lines of Is This It and that era of the Strokes. Another possible callback to the earlier era is mentioning of certain symbols that are present on the first two album covers, these two albums being many times considered their best work and their most critically praised records, some people even going as far as to say that they fell off after this point. I know there has been other interpretations or even more simple interpretations of this song, but what I think this is grasping at, and maybe I'm getting the wrong idea, is this song is a somewhat ironic commentary to their less supportive fans who want them to go back to the earlier days. But I am well aware that there are many people who only consider these first two albums to be good and then think they fell off after that, and I think this song might be talking to those people. In this way, it stands out a lot from the themes and topics of the other songs, but how do you incorporate a song like this into a narrative or a story? Because it's very meta, it's very fourth wall breaking in a lot of ways, and if you're going to have a track listing that tells any sort of story or has any sort of connection, it's not going to fit in there one way or the other. What this brings to mind is Bring Me the Horizon's Amo. They have the song on there, Heavy Metal, which is very, very blatantly calling out to their less supportive fans, and I feel the same ways about that song on there as I do on this one on here. I feel like that's the idea that we're grasping at here. It's just that it's pretty much impossible to make it fit into a narrative in any way, so I can't really blame it for the lack of cohesion that it provides. Track number 5, Eternal Summer, is maybe the most up for interpretation this entire album gets. This is a very spacey, atmospheric cut, maybe the most atmospheric cut on here, creating such a large, luscious atmosphere all the way through it, through the instrumentation, the various switch-ups that it takes all the way through the song, right down to the very ad-libbed vocals that are repeated all through the track that make you feel fully immersed. It's kind of easy to get lost in this song, which is both a good and a bad thing, because I feel like you might miss something a lot of the time if you just let it envelop you fully, but if you pay a lot of time, give a lot of care to this song when you listen to it, I think you can get a lot out of it. The singing featured on this track is another thing that might break you out of the trance, as very mellow, calm, down-tuned singing is all throughout the verses, and it goes into a much more aggressive very loud angle once the hook comes around, and it's very empowering and passionate, as opposed to the very spacey singing featured on the bridge and the verses. The almost apocalyptic sounds that are featured on the end of this track are the best climax I've ever seen in a Strokes song so far. The leading up to this point is just crazy. It's wild. This song goes from making you feel this overwhelming sense of dread to just making all of the instruments pretty much go away and just have this space that was just completely filled mere seconds ago go to completely empty. It's like the world just ended and now you're just sitting here in the blank space that's left for you with Julian just singing over barren nothingness. And this track in many ways leads into the next one, and I feel like what this may be about is finding so much fulfillment in achievements but yet still feeling like you need to do more. Like there's more that you haven't done yet that you still need to accomplish. That would be a very easy angle for this band to take. Is This It? Their debut album came out almost 20 years ago now, and that's considered one of the better albums of all time on many people's lists. Clearly, they're still striving for more. We have a whole new album here experimenting with new and interesting things. I find it to be a really compelling angle if that's what they were trying to get at here. It almost even feels a lot of ways sonically as half light, half dark. We have the very gritty vocals on the hook section compared to the very spacey ones, and then there's that switch up at the end that I already mentioned. And I think that it's recognizing both the good and the bad of kind of making it, so to speak. This track, number 6, At the Door, ties a lot into that last song lyrically. Brings up the motif that's seen through tracks 6 and 9 of this album of a door. And the transition that's really featured here is feeling worthless, not because of a lack or need for more achievements, but more because a relationship fell apart and made you feel miserable is kind of the essence that I feel is being conveyed on this song. And of course there is the elephant in the room of what does the door motif mean? And I think that this is sort of a social disconnect. If you think about it, in a lot of ways it makes sense, because if there's a door in between you and the outside world, there's still a divider. Even though you know you could technically go through it, it's still there. It's not a definitive barrier, but it's something that still blocks you off in that way. And a lot of this in here kind of shows Julian talking about wanting this person to still be happy, but not really wanting to do anything specific about it, just wanting them to use him for whatever they may need, and he feels very disconnected and disjointed a lot of the time in this song. That motif carries on through the rest of the track listing, and I think it's present here. But sonically, this song is very immersive and very well done otherwise as well. The synths featured on here actually give me some really strong MGMT vibes, and the whole song in general does. And this gives me this very special feeling I only do when synthesizers are used every once in a while that I did when hearing Kids by MGMT for the first time. It's a very distinct feeling you get when listening to this kind of music that only comes around every once in a while, and I find it really interesting that I felt that here. The guitar interpolations on this song are very subtle. What they do is add some more atmosphere and create a little bit of atmosphere, as much of the guitar playing on this song does. There's not a whole lot here other than the synthesizers and the guitar, but what's here is really well done, and Julian's singing feels both detached and disconnected, like I said, but also very impassioned, and it kind of transcends over the mix in that way. Track number 7, Why Are Sundays So Depressing, has a lot to unpack on it. One thing I want to specifically mention when speaking about this song is how juxtaposing the title is with the sound that this song brings. This is one of the more simply played, one of the more happy sounding instrumentals, but it literally has depressing in the name. And in a lot of ways, I feel like that contradiction is still present when this song is carrying on. What Julian almost seems to be speaking about here is kind of this nostalgic tone that we've already seen a couple times on the album, but he's almost angry that he's reminiscing. That's at least kind of or maybe in self-denial that he misses certain things, saying, no, I don't miss that, I don't miss this. It's just that he still feels the need maybe to talk about it, to write songs about it, and it's just kind of a nagging itch in a way. As I already mentioned, it's a very simple instrumental. It's one of the most simple ones on here, but that's not to say that there's not a lot to like about it. The very bright and cheery atmosphere that it creates adds a lot to the song and adds a totally different dynamic to it that I've already talked a lot about. And there's a really decent guitar section on the bridge as well that I'd just like to give a little bit of a shout out to. Track number 8 is called Not the Same Anymore, and I feel like this is one of the most metaphorically dense songs once again to unpack. A lot of this song seems like him still reminiscing on the past, but in a totally different way here. He seems to be mentioning times as a child that he was betrayed and how this made him grow up to be very dejected from the world, mentioning how this door was something that he was kicked out of when he was young, basically. That's how the door came up, and he still might feel very detached and neglected by the world that raised him. This song features one of the most simple overall instrumentals, and it feels very, very melancholic overall. This is probably the most depressive song on the entire album because of the dark subject matter that it's handling. There's a really nice guitar solo on here, but a depressing guitar solo is something that I've only heard the Strokes pull off in the way that they do, because it's so nicely fit into this incredibly, like I said, melancholic, depressing sound, depressing atmosphere that the whole song brings together. One of the least notable in that particular way. I really do enjoy this song though, even if it sounds like that's kind of a gripe. Finally, the closer on here, Ode to the Mets, talks about New York City, where they were from, and reminiscing on everything that the city offered them and the way that it raised them into the people that they are now. That much is somewhat difficult to unpack from this song, but it's almost defined even just down to the title that that's what this song is about, so I feel like it's a little bit easier to unpack in that way. This does see the final wraparound of the door motif. He talks about returning to New York City and then talks about the door and how it's still there when he returns back home, and I feel like in a lot of ways this song is about feeling nostalgic over the city, but having this disconnect set there that makes it not feel the same as it always did. This track is beautifully composed. It is another song on here that just really brings a tear to the eye because of this super passionate, well-performed delivery, and it's a very melancholic song once again, and just brings so much passion and emotion, and it really is the only way to close out an album like this. I can guarantee to you in a lot of different ways that this album is even more detached than I have made it sound in some certain sections, and it's very, very different and jarring sometimes even from song to song to get such sonically different changes, and really it doesn't start to feel like the same album instrumentally until you get to track 8. 7 in a lot of ways sounds like 8 and 9, but really these last 3 songs are the only ones that feel connected to the ones surrounding them in a lot of ways. We've talked a lot on here about the door motif and what that might mean, and the way that that connects this last leg of the album that I said was already somewhat connected all of these themes and ideas are very present. It's hard sometimes to fit them into every song. The biggest standouts, and I mentioned this as I was going through the tracks, is the opener, The Adults Are Talking, kind of not tying that well into anything, and it's kind of strange that this is the opener in that way, because you'd think that it would set the scene a little bit more. I know that this is a song that's been bouncing around at least since the beginning of 2019 as they performed it live at one point or another. I'm not really sure if they put it onto this album because it's just a song that existed and needed to get out there in some way, shape, or form, or if it does fit into the higher narrative that we have been talking about. But I think the only way you can really tie this in is the feeling of being a regular person kind of fits into the whole not feeling accomplished enough idea, and maybe the narrator of the song wants to be in this higher position where they can feel more powerful and more above the average person. The second song that I also have already mentioned stands out is the fourth track on here, Bad Decisions, and I really think that if my interpretation is in any way correct, the only way that you could tie it in is looking at it from a different angle and having other people maybe putting him down as a person for making certain bad decisions, maybe even feeling negatively about yourself because of the way that the fans were interpreting or accepting different albums. And really what I'm meaning to say, what my overall point is in bringing up how different each one of these songs are and how they still tie in, is that almost every song on here can feel complete, very, very complete on its own, but also feel very complete in the narrative of the album. It still feels like it has some sort of place in this album when you look at it very deeply, when you don't just take it at the surface level, because a lot of times on the surface level what you're going to be hearing is very confusing in juxtaposition to the song before. This may be a little bit of a rough transition in some ways, but I want to talk about some of the other things that I found notable to talk about on this album. One of the most notable things to keep in mind here is that legendary producer Rick Rubin was all over this thing and handled most of the production on these songs, looking at the song credits, that is. And I think that the very different vocal mixing than what some people might be expecting here is much to do with Rick Rubin's production here. I don't think the guy has really worked with a lot of bands that kind of bury their vocalist in the mix. So it's very interesting to hear how much Julian stands out, like super loud, sometimes even louder than the rest of the mix, and almost is a little bit too loud on certain songs. Like I mentioned already on the opener, The Adults Are Talking. On this song, he has these very, very calm, mellow, almost, like I said, almost ASMR-like in some way, vocals that are grasping at being a whisper, and yet they're really, really loud in the mix, and it's a little bit off-putting in that way. But I think that a lot of the production otherwise is very, very well done, and that's really my only super big gripe with it. And I want to make very strong mention to the mix of this album in a very positive way to juxtapose that negative that I brought up. The use of space and the filling of that space all across this album is absolutely stunning. What usually is the formula here is vocals standing out super strong in the mix, as well as guitars doing really interesting things, while the bass and drum playing are kind of the glue. I've already talked about there being certain songs where there's even different guitar melodies going on in each ear. The vocals stand out always really, really strongly and add a totally different angle to every song. I have to give so much props to the band and having this chemistry working this well together and just feeling so much like a cohesive chunk of music all the time. Albert Hammond Jr. and Nick Valenci create super interesting guitar melodies all over this thing. I can't give enough praise to this, even though I'm sure you're tired of hearing me talk about it. Just the guitar work on here is so strong. creates such a wild environment all the way through. Fab does some super solid drumming all the way through here as well. And what I love about the style of drumming that Fab does on Strokes songs that I've noticed is that it's not always trying to blow me away. I feel like a lot of drummers go a little bit overboard, go a little bit too flashy with their drum playing, and I think that it's to their detriment sometimes because it's standing out a little bit too much while it really should just be a rhythm sometimes. And the rhythms that are played on the drums all throughout this thing are really strong, really catchy rhythms that once again form as somewhat of a glue. The biggest glue though on here is the bass playing. There's always a strong bass line going through each one of these songs that helps glue it all together and make it feel like a solid, cohesive piece of music. And it's all aided very well by some pretty solid production that I've already brought up to just create such a interesting environment that's both entirely innovative and very consistent to the genre that it comes out of. I have really little in the way of complaints. What I have, I've already brought up, and my biggest complaint here is just how jarring it feels to go from song to song sometimes on here. It's in so many ways just a really non-casual listen, and there's nothing necessarily inherently wrong with that. I just wish sometimes that it felt a little bit more structured as an entire album together. And in some ways, I think that the detriment that really works to is that there's so many solid motifs that I think if the sonic direction was taken slightly different, and if there weren't those two songs that stand out so much from the other 7, that it would feel like such a solid piece altogether and would just be one of the best full front to back album listens that I've really had. But since there's such differences in the ways that I've already mentioned, there's going to be some disconnect there. I got a lot out of this. I think it's one of the strongest listens I've had this year for sure. I think the Strokes, the new abnormal, is deserving about 8+ out of 10. Now let me know what you thought of this album down in the comment section below. I would love to start a conversation with you guys. I know a lot of you were waiting to hear my thoughts on this after the Is This It reaction, so I want to know what you thought of what I thought and what you're also thinking about this album down there. It'd be great to start a little bit of a discussion down there. If you liked what you saw in the video today, make sure to drop a like on the video and subscribe so you know when I upload. All of that is greatly appreciated, and I will see you in the next video.